Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Responsible Edge podcast with me, Charlie Martin. As a reminder, the Responsible Edge is a show about business practices that not only achieve results, but do so with integrity. So today I was delighted to be joined by Richard Hills-Ingyon. Richard is the founder of the Recycled Candle Company. And an absolutely brilliant guy in many ways, and had some really fantastic insights to share with us. Looking at the article about Apple and about the way that they use recycling and reuse of their products. So really interesting conversation with Richard in that particular area. We also talked about some of the key pieces of advice he would have offered to his younger self setting out on a career that involved him building the business. Again, some really interesting stuff there. So hope you really enjoyed today's show. If you've got any questions or thoughts or comments for either ourselves or for Richard, please feel free to get in touch. And as I say, enjoy the show. Richard, I've been enthused and excited and very much looking forward to my Friday morning, getting a chance to talk to you. For no other reason than every other conversation we've ever had before has been full of enthusiasm and fun and energy and optimism and all of the above. So thank you very much for joining us today.
No worries. Thank you for having me. I'm flattered by your very kind words. Thank you. Yeah. Hopefully I can live up to that pressure.
And I'm delighted that I'm surprised, I have to admit, but delighted that we've got you for your very first podcast appearance, because you strike me as a very conversational and an eloquent chap. So very pleased to have sort of snaffled you at the start of your podcasting career.
Yeah, no, this is quite exciting. This could be the start of something new. It's not. Yeah, I've never done podcasts. I've never dabbled in them. I've got a background in theatre, but never podcasted about myself.
Excellent. Well, I think you're going to be an absolute natural. But thank you for joining us. Starting, Richard, we obviously you've given a little bit of a flavour already of I guess your background and background in theatre and drama. But as I mentioned to you in our kind of preamble before jumping on the recording, just be really interested to kind of share with our listeners kind of a bit more background on Richard and your path and your career, the things that sort of inspired you along the way. And then perhaps just a crescendo with kind of, where things are at for you at the moment. Just be interested to get a bit more background on you.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, overall, I am passionate about the environment. I grew up in Devon in a hotel. Family have got a hotel down in Devon, which is amazing and wonderful, but incredibly interesting at the same time, and very much helped my passion for the environment growing up in Devon, but growing up in a hotel. The two have blended really, really well in my career and my passions. I got a passion for the environment very young. I'm really into gardening and recycling. I think one year I went to the Devon County show, and there was a whole stand for "Don't Let Devon Go to Waste." Mm-hmm. And they had pens made from old CD cases. They had rulers made from old coffee cups, and I was amazed. I hadn't really come across that before. I thought about it. I grew up fairly remote, to be honest. So when other kids were playing football or computer games, I was talking about growing courgettes and runner beans with old people from the village horticultural society. I got really into acting as well when I was younger, and actually went off to university to study acting, and then subsequently moved to London. And when I was in London, a friend of mine who'd also moved from Devon said, make sure you do something that connects you with home, connects you with who you are, because it can be a bit of a scary place. So I started to make candles, which was a hobby I'd always had. And my mum had got me a candle making kit when I was about 8 years old. So I started to make candles. But what I decided to do was to go to all the local pubs and restaurants and ask if I could have all their old waste wax. And I would then clean it and recycle it and make it into new wax, and then sell the candles at a Sunday market. Because I'm not very good at sitting still or doing a hobby for the sake of doing a hobby. I go from 0 to 100 pretty quick with it. So ended up as a candle maker specializing in recycling. Met my wonderful partner back in London, and we started a business called the Recycled Candle Company. Does what it says on the tin. And then we spent 10 years running that, arguing, being stressed, being emotional, but ultimately helping divert tons of waste away from landfills and other waste streams into recycling and making new products. And that's really been a massive passion of mine and what I want to do. Moving on, we recently sold the business, so I'm a free agent. I'm just back to gardening and reading books, which is something I haven't done for 10 years.
Fantastic, Richard. We've obviously spoken about your background before, but that was a brilliant nutshell, I have to say. You've you introduced yourself brilliantly there. I want to pry into a couple of things. So you were. I want to go back to the university days. So you're studying drama or acting at
Theatre
uni?
studies.
Theatre studies. Okay, and you're doing that by day and literally kind of going around pubs and snaffling old wax and producing your candles by night.
Absolutely. Well, it was when I moved to London after university that I started to work in a theatre. I was working in the bar. I think I was bar supervisor at one point. God knows why they gave me that sort of commitment. And the theatre was closed on Sundays, so it was wanting to do something on a Sunday, but working at a bar, not really being able to afford London. So I did a village market in Richmond. Actually, was the first one. So yeah, a lot of my friends worked in hospitality, and having grown up in a hotel, I had sort of first-hand experience of how waste can work in places like that, and how easy it can be to just get rid of stuff and not really think about it. So I was able to step in and say, "Hey, you probably have old candles. I
Mm.
could definitely make something out of them and then sell them." And it meant that I wasn't having to buy new materials, so financially it was beneficial for me, but also that massive part of my brain that just gets dopamine from recycling was really ticking.
Mm. And talk us through. I think it's fascinating thinking about that kind of. You mentioned the Sunday market. That was sort of the starting point, if you like. But when was the moment when you realised like we could build a real business out of this? Like, what talk us through the kind of transition of the moments that kind of geared you towards realising that was an opportunity.
It's a really interesting one, actually, because when I started doing the markets and selling candles, I didn't tell anyone that they were made from old candles,
Mm.
because there was a sort of assumption that perhaps recycling meant old and gross and not new and shiny and good. So I kept it pretty quiet for the first couple of markets, and it wasn't until somebody stopped and I sort of had a conversation with them, and I wasn't getting a huge amount of conversation from them, but having grown up in hospitality, I just kept talking at them and was sort of panicking a little bit, and happened to mention that I collect old candles from local pubs and churches and turn them into new ones. And this lady, her eyes just lit up, and I was like, "Oh God, what?" And she was like, "So they're recycled?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's interesting." Um, so then the next market, I did a little sign that was like, "Oh, made from old candles, recycled, stopped." And it just slowly over time, this brand built itself, and I
Mm.
followed what people cared about. I mean, I'd always done it as to what I cared about and what I was passionate, and what I felt was right. But for many reasons, not just financially, but environmentally. So managing to then grow the brand organically around the demand that people did have for that story and that level of care was really relieving, because it just opened the doors to me to say business can be good. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
new, shiny, perfect, flawless. It can be recycled, it can be environmental, and often there is a bit of a gap between those two camps, sadly. But yeah, it was fairly organic, which was nice.
Mm. And such a. I mean, obviously, we'll come on to talk about the article that we're going to kind of focus our conversation around today. But to have an opportunity to build a business where, I mean, in the name itself, but at the very heart of what you were offering and you were doing in terms of the product itself, like sustainability, recycling is very much core. And then it's not something that has to be kind of retrospectively fitted into a model that
Yeah.
maybe doesn't have those things at the heart of it.
I think this day and age, we can very much see that there are bigger companies that their products, their services, their business is designed around a certain way that perhaps environmental issues don't fit into that as well. And it can be a hurdle, it can be a struggle, it can be a challenge. Whereas I'm very fortunate that, if anything, the business sort of came later for me. I liked going to pubs with my friends. I
Mm.
loved that I was getting all these old candles, and I was building relationships with managers and staff. And I was saying, oh, if you just keep a little box, then when you finish with any candles, pop them in, and I'll pop round once a week and pick them up. And then suddenly my tiny little bedroom in a house share in London had like half of it taken up by candles. And I was like, oh, I've got to do something with these. So the need to then process them to make
Mm.
product. And then I had too many products, and I was like, oh God, I better sell these. So in terms of growth of business was always dictated by the demand of recycling, which
Mm.
I'm aware is not a common business landscape for companies of that size or structure. So luckily it built, like I said, very organically, even the layout of the business itself. And then over the years it grew, and there was sometimes when demand for candles was so good that we had to really scrabble to find more recycling, and then there was
Mm.
times where we had to find new revenues of using material because we had such an influx of recycling coming in. So
Mm.
it chopped and changed a lot, but luckily it was so integral to the business itself, and it was in the name, obviously.
Mm. Yeah, no, I love it. We're going to come on to talk a bit more about the candle company, but just before we kind of talk about this week's article, I always ask every guest to kind of just briefly explain to us, and you've kind of touched on a few points here, but what does, like, when you think about your business, but you also think more broadly about like the commercial landscape that we're all kind of engaging with, what does responsible and ethical kind of practice broadly, not just talking about recycling here, but essentially doing the right thing in a commercial context, what does that mean to you?
Ooh, it is a can of worms, any discussion along these lines at the moment, I think, because for me as a consumer, I want to shop responsibly. I want to know that products I'm buying have been made without deforestation or burning or people, suffering. I want to buy products that are responsibly produced. I also want to buy products that I know that I can, at the end of their life, recycle or repurpose or make sure that I'm not contributing as much to landfill. Now,
Mhm.
I, as a consumer, are just one camp. I think there's so many different camps that people have. There are people who are very anti-plastic, which is great, obviously, wonderful. Yes, the less plastic, the better. However, there are some camps that are more based around water usage.
Mm.
There are some that are based around landfill. There's so many different battles that you can have, and I think trying to fight every battle is hard work, and it can be really overwhelming for people. I have my own ethics, my own sort of guidelines that I stick to, and living in the UK, water usage isn't as high a priority for me unless
Mm.
I'm buying a product that comes from somewhere with a lot of water issues. But I'm getting carried away. So for me, as a consumer, it's battles, and I think
Mm.
you've got to align yourself with the battles that work for you and the communities that help and can steer you in the right direction to the right sort of companies. From a
Can I, Richard, sorry to interrupt you there, but I've just got a question on that. So you, but as a consumer, I just want to get your touch point on it. You've alluded to like it's the educational side of things. So it's understanding as a consumer, like what are the different factors at play here when it comes to the engagement with one, offering or one product manufacturer versus another. Like, what's your take on how we as consumers can go about educating ourselves better? Like, what are the things that you've done as a consumer to make yourself more aware of who to engage with and who not to?
Oh, that's another problem because it is endless. The amount of information, whether a lot of it is true or not, is a whole different conversation. For me personally, I have a lot of conversations with friends, people in the industry, and conversations that I have when I'm out having a drink with friends can sometimes be about nice products, or if somebody comes over to the house and they're like, "Oh, I love that draining board," and I'm like, "Oh, it's great. It's made from bamboo." I think there's a lot of peer-to-peer reviews that are very
Mhm.
helpful. If I'm buying something online or in a shop, I do want to research it, but at the same time, I don't want to spend 2 weeks trying to find if the new set of towels for the bathroom is the best option out there. You've got to you've got to have a little bit of trust. And that's where I think as a consumer, we place a lot of trust and the hope of honest trust into
Mm.
the businesses that are selling it. And they're either promoting sustainability from a point of view of because it's the right thing to do, because it's good, or because they're trying to tick boxes. And it's normally a mixture of the two.
Mm. And sorry, so that was brilliant. So I think you were coming on to reflect on, from an ethical and responsible practice or business perspective, like what it means for you as a business leader and an owner of a company. So I think that was where you were headed with.
Yeah, my goal has always been trust and honesty, because when you're in business, when you're running businesses and you're managing staff, and and you're also the one that's having to reconcile the bank account for the accountant with a degree in drama studies, there's certain things that I'm going to try and lighten the load, and things like having some kind of corporate statement that is different to everything else can be a bit exhausting. So for me, it's always been about honesty. It's always been very open book, and it's been very conversation based. If somebody comes to us and says, I don't understand how that claim can be true, I'll sit down with them, I'll have that discussion, and then maybe I'll build something onto the website that has these sort of frequently asked questions or a Q&A with me online or something like that. So for me, it's honesty, because it's
Mm.
just easier. And if you're doing the right thing, it's easier.
And isn't it also, I mean, I think this is an interesting one. I think my personal experience, it's knowing if you're the sort of person who feels, who sort of takes things away from work, if you like, you go home and you're, I mean, most of us that are starting our own businesses, it's pretty full on all the time anyway. That you want to be able to, I mean, I know it's all cliche, but you genuinely want to be able to put your head down at night and not worry, I think, about,
Yeah.
you want to feel really, really clear in your conscience that actually we might not be perfect, but we're being very transparent about where our imperfections lie, and we're very clear and open about what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do, and that is a way in which you can have those sound night sleeps that are so important when you're thinking about the energy that's required in order to drive your startup and your business forward. Is that a fair synopsis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think transparency is so key, because for me, I didn't have a business degree. I didn't have a candle making degree, but here I was making candles, caring about the environment. I fell into it because it's what I love and it's what I'm passionate about. Full transparency out there meant that people came to me with questions and queries, and they thought, it's great that you're doing that, but what do you do about this certain little part of your process? And it would perhaps be something I hadn't thought of before, or thought the customers wanted to hear, all the way back to when I first told somebody it was recycled and their eyes lit up. I hadn't thought that would be part of the journey at that point. So the transparency and the conversation allows you as a business owner, I think, to develop based on what your customers want, what your audience are actually interested in, rather than you just throwing stuff out there. And I think any form of engagement in this day and age, where everything can be so faceless and we're worried about scams and we're worried about fake companies, I think any form of humanity and transparency is so vital to building that customer base.
Which I think perfectly, Richard. I don't know. It was always going to work seamlessly. This particular episode brings us perfectly onto this week's kind of article that we'd like to kind of base some of our next area of our conversation around. Would you perhaps just start by just sharing with our listeners kind of essentially a summary of what the article covers? I think it's a Bloomberg piece that we shared with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's first of all, it's a very interesting article. I haven't got the name of the article in front of me now, which I probably should have done, but it's looking at Apple's commitment to recycling, and there's lots of ways that you can interpret this article. I think overall, the bullet points are: Apple got a contract with a different recycling company to recycle a lot of their old phones, their old handsets and things like that, because on paper it's the right thing to do. That does, however, open can of worms for discussions around should they be reusing it rather than recycling it. They then did an audit of this company, as anybody would, in terms of their due diligence and the claims that they're making, and found a lot of problems around theft. And I think the article initially sort of hints at members of staff who are having to destroy these perfectly usable bits of equipment, which, yeah, from a human perspective, that would be weird and that doesn't feel right. So, yeah, maybe they put a few in their pocket and they give one to their grandson or something like that. Fine. The article develops and it becomes apparent that there's pallets going missing. There's a much bigger problem here.
Were there 95,000 items or something like that
Yeah, I
they
think there was
found?
a lot more than just a few people putting them in the pockets. And it's tricky because there's so many different ways. And like I said earlier, with what are your personal battles? What are your fights that you're going to be passionate about? I look at this and I think it's a shame that they're not reusing this material, that they are sending it to be recycled. If there is usable equipment there, it should be given a second chance, because ultimately it's the most environmental thing to do. Making equipment last longer, not producing raw materials and virgin equipment, versus, I would say, capitalism and the need for businesses to sell more. Apple can't sell more products if they're reusing products. They're going to make more money off a brand new phone than they are. So it's good that they are finding ways to recycle and to get, things that are undercutting their own business off the market. And I'm hardly surprised that at any level people are going to step in and try and make a quick buck wherever they can. And that conversation is then all about due diligence and auditing and inspections and things like that, which is hugely important for any form of waste from a safety point of view, but also from a bottom line point of view. This is a business, and they need to make sure that what they're saying is happening because they've given it to somebody else. They've entrusted another company with that. And in the same way that then that company has entrusted their members of staff to do that. So there's been a breakdown, and at any level you could argue, whether it's right or wrong, but it's quite a thorough article.
Richard, by the way, that was a brilliant synopsis and an introduction. Let me ask you your take. So I think that for me, one of the first things that that arose in the article is like the question of just the hypocrisy at the heart of Apple's kind of environmental objectives and statements and targets that they've kind of set for themselves, which is obviously a key part of their kind of strategic positioning of them as a company being a sustainable entity that's looking to kind of improve and get better. Whether or not that is directly at odds, I suppose, with the fact that they are choosing to recycle, as you say, phones that could perhaps be just refurbished and reused. Like, what's your take on that, like, fundamental hypocrisy at the heart of the way that they're operating?
Yeah, I mean, Apple is a business. Apple needs to make money to make everybody happy that's invested. There's so much at stake that it's really difficult for me to step in. If I was suddenly in charge, I would say, well, hey, this is how to make a good impact. Only make one phone every 2 years. We don't need a new phone every 6 months. Once every 2 years, fine. Technology moves ahead so fast, but yeah, 2 years, fine. We can all last 2 years with a brand new iPhone. But that's going to have serious implications on the rest of the structure of their business and the amount of people that are employed and all that. It's unfortunate that this article brought to light this legal proceedings that happened with the recycling company, that it all sort of came out round about the time that Apple were making a commitment to 100% carbon neutrality, I think, by 2030. Really unfortunate for them. But I mean, it raises so many incredible conversations to then have.
For me, I don't know about you, but I think this almost comes back to this question that we spoke about before about the recycled candle company, and how you mentioned like the organic development of the business around sustainability principles, if you like it was at the very core and the heart of what you were doing, and therefore it was, in a way, and I know perhaps not so now, but it was easier, if you like, to be able to commit to those principles because it was at the heart of the product offering itself. I suppose with Apple, the tricky thing is that there are almost, these are odds, as you say, factors and influences on how they go about doing things. But does that not, therefore, and I think that my takeaway is in terms of those environmental commitments and objectives, you can't have those sorts of objectives align or sit alongside these sorts of insights that we glean about the way that they operate, you've got to be more sympathetic, I think, to the public rhetoric that will arise as a result of these sorts of things coming out. That would be my flavor, but I don't know if you would agree with that.
Oh, yeah, it's just the more I went through the article a few times to try and read it from different mindsets, almost to try and be like, as a consumer, how do I feel about this? As somebody passionate about recycling, how do I feel about this? You know, I there's a secondhand electric store in the town I live in, and I pop in every now and then with some old PlayStation games or something, and I sell. And I try to involve myself in, you know, if I buy a Kindle, I might go and buy it secondhand from there. And I think that process of reusing, I don't need the newest one. I just want to read a book. But also what I see when I'm there is the shelves are absolutely full of secondhand Apple products. So when I read this article and Apple say, you know, our first aim here is to reuse because that's the greenest option. I can appreciate that their second option is to get it off the market because they're probably completely overwhelmed and they do need to hit targets. They are a business. We do live in a capitalist society. That is part of it. So I think as a business as well that is very tech based, you know, my business was very eco based. That's what it did, and it worked, and it was the time. My business wouldn't have worked 30 years ago because nobody really gave a damn, and it would have been seen differently. So I think to compare this very corporate, very tech-based company to a very green hymn sheet isn't always going to be the easiest thing to do. And obviously there's huge issues at play. So we've got to ask ourselves, are they doing the best they can? And have they created an open enough discussion so that experts, people, passionate people can come forward and say, why aren't you doing this? You know, and people are coming forward and saying, why aren't you reusing them? And Apple are like, well, we are doing as much as we can. So I would love, personally, I'd love to see a lot more data. I'd love to see how much material does get reused and repurposed and why stuff gets sent to recycling that it does. Because, again, like I said, the reduction of raw materials, the production of virgin equipment, is the most damaging. That's where the majority of the carbon is going to be used. That's where the majority of precious metals, minerals, and stuff like that are going to be harvested for these products. So if we can reduce that as much as possible for the sake of the environment, then please let's do it. But we also can't stand here and expect Apple to listen to that and cut their profits and cut their team and, you know, annoy everybody that's invested in them over the last 25 years. So it's a real minefield of a situation that, again, you've just got to choose which hat you want to wear when you're passionate about it and go in with those questions and try and make a decision with as much information given to you as possible.
Let me ask you this, though, Richard. I think you're absolutely right. It's a incredibly complex issue that you and I sort of spitballing can probably not break down to the sort of core sum of its parts. But let me ask you, like, what do you think Apple in this situation could have done differently? What would you have, besides sharing more data, what else do you think that they could have done to address this issue?
I think it's something that they found out fairly quickly, that doing something in-house is always going to be better. I think designing a product with the end life of the product in sight is important, because you need to know that what you're producing, where it's going to go. I think customers want to know that a little bit more. And you need to know what reasons there are behind. Now, obviously, everybody's moving much further towards a more environmental landscape, thankfully, but that wasn't always the case. You know, they can bring out a new phone tomorrow, and how many millions of people will line up to buy it and just throw their old one away? They need to appreciate that there is a growing demand for environmental issues and communication, data, info. But also we need to sit back and say, I think they're probably looking at their core demographic and saying, it's not that environmentally focused. There is obviously due diligence and corporate responsibility that they are adhering to as much as possible, but Obviously, more can always be done. um, but I think taking things in house, having a lot more data, having a lot more information available to those who want it is
Mhm.
so important in this day and age.
And how about and in terms of the relationship that they had with, I think it was we were querying what how you pronounce it, but let's say Geep, the recycling partner. In terms of, I'd be fascinated to get your take, both from a kind of a technical perspective, but equally from a sort of a strategic point of view, regarding the work that you did with at the Candle Company. Like, what's your take on those sort of recycling partners, if you like, and working with other organisations of that kind of nature
Mm.
in production?
Yeah, it's a very interesting area. We at the Recycled Candle Company, we had a tenureship with TerraCycle, who was an incredible global recycling machine, huge company doing incredible things. Um, and we were one of their vendors, so we worked with them on a few different projects where we were sent a lot of material to process, recycle. We did the research and development, we did product research, and I think overall we did really well with them, and we really enjoyed working with them. Now, part of that partnership was a lot of contracts, a lot of legal jargon, a lot of scary letters saying we're going to come and make sure you're doing exactly what you're doing. Which due diligence, sorry, absolutely they need to do that. And when they did come and visit us, and they said, "You say that you're doing this. You say that you're doing this. You say that you're doing this. Is that the case?" And we were able, as a team, to say, absolutely, it comes in here, this is what we do. And we were passionate about it, and we were excited about
Mm.
it. The business, our business structure was always based on diverting stuff away from landfill, so to be able to be part of that on a much bigger scale with TerraCycle was incredible. um,
And sorry, Richard, just so I'm clear, were TerraCycle delivering you recycled wax to then work with?
we were getting post-consumer waste that did include wax.
Okay.
We were getting post-consumer waste from collection points at supermarkets or community groups and things like that. There was a lot of sorting and separating that needed to happen, and we did a lot of that by hand. Well, we did all of it by hand. It was normally me. Um, and I feel that a lot of that sorting and separating by hand led to a better quality outcome at the end. We then had to sort and separate and send different materials back to TerraCycle once they'd been sorted. And then any wax that was left over, we then processed into various different materials and
I see.
products.
Okay.
And it was incredible. It was a huge, huge process.
Mm.
But very similar to this Apple situation. You get the post-consumer product. For them, they need to take it apart, and they've got various different precious metals. They've got glass, they've got plastics, they've got other metals. Whereas with us, we just had 3 or 4 different things.
What were those things, Richard? I'm fascinated. I'm thinking, I've got this vision of, like, essentially this old candlestick turning up and it's all a bit mishmashed or whatever. And, like, what do you do with that? Like, how do you go about recycling,
So the
the
recycling
wax
for us
itself?
was the cycling for us at the Recycled Candle Company was fairly, I'd say on paper, fairly straightforward. Obviously, there's a lot of legal testing and chemical balance sheets and everything and stuff further down the line. But as a material that comes to us, wax can be melted down, refined in various different ways, whether it's through sorting, separating, heating, cooling, vacuum pressing, all of these things, to then make a finished product that
Mhm.
we used as candles, or we had other products that were just using waxes, or we sometimes just processed material just to clean it and then get it back out to market as remit waxes for the car industry and stuff like that.
Mm.
So the stuff that we worked on with TerraCycle wasn't actually candles. I don't think I can actually say what it was. I think the brand
Okay.
wanted to keep it a bit quieter, a bit like Apple, which is a shame because I feel that things like this, the consumers, they're interested in this. They want to know that stuff is being done properly. They want that human story. I think
Mm.
if the brand in question were happy to talk about who we were and what we were doing, I think it would create some really interesting conversations. But I
Mm.
think what they want to do is avoid us as a smaller company perhaps using their name to progress ourselves unless they've done a good amount of due diligence to make sure. You've got to be careful with who and what you align yourself to. And I think
Mm.
Apple found that with Geep. I think There can be a lot of promising things on paper, and when they went and did their findings, it was a struggle. I think even the article mentioned that having the Apple contract was a huge thing for Geep.
Mm.
And what an incredible opportunity to say, we are this company, we work with Apple. Obviously, that's huge kudos for them. And many other industry leaders, not as industry leading as Apple, are going to go to this company and say, we trust you because of that partnership. And sadly, when that crumbles, yeah, everybody else is going to look at it and go, ooh, I don't want that for me.
And when you're footing the bill for, I think it was a $31 million lawsuit that Apple have slapped on you, you think to yourself, right, this hasn't quite turned out how we hoped originally.
Yeah. Luckily, with the recycled candle company, when I was managing it, the stuff that we were getting in wasn't really of any value. So we would never have any problem with somebody stealing a few half-used tea lights to take home, or if they did, go for it. Just bring the aluminium back in so we can recycle that as well. But yeah, the products that we had were low value, very obviously diverted from landfill, and it was so great that we were able to do something with it. And the staff were inspired. They saw these tons and tons of material come in, processed over a period of time, and then sent back out as new products to customers who loved it because it was recycled. From start to finish, it was honest and it was easy, and it was so great to be a part of. I can see that with things like Apple, they've got so much more around it as well. I think even in terms of safety, I'd love more information as to how long it takes an iPhone to become dangerous. And I've heard of battery swelling and things like that. Perhaps not with Apple products alone, but I want to know then how much they're diverting to recycling instead of renewal or reusing, because of safety concerns, in which case I say, great, thank you for caring about my safety. I don't want to go and buy a new phone from you that great, it's been recycled and everything. It's not great if it burns my house down. So and again, it's wearing those different hats. It's saying, I do put my house and my health and safety higher sometimes than recycling. I will buy new products sometimes if it is the safer and more sensible option. But having that balance mentally, I think, is really important.
Out of interest on that point, Richard, besides safety, what are the other factors that you would perhaps consider that would usurp, if you like, the recyclability of a product when making a decision? Is there anything else?
There is. For me, I've got a lot of stuff. I'm a big fan of reusing and repurposing and sites like FreeCycle to get old bits and bobs. I think the majority of my kitchen utensils are from my best friend before she moved abroad, and I've kept them going for years. And my spatula's broken in about 4 different places, but I'm still using it because it still works. But if I was to go out tomorrow and see this amazing brand new spatula that has a lifetime guarantee of 20 years, and I think, well, that's going to stop me buying 3 spatulas. Great. Obviously very small scale in terms of the spatula, just an example. I, for example, would absolutely love to drive a brand new electric car. I would love not to use diesel. I would love to drive around and see how far I got on electric miles. But at the same time, I drive a 16-year-old diesel that is still going and still working. So from an environmental point of view, it is currently better for me to drive my old diesel than it is to buy a brand new electric car. And as soon as second-hand electric cars come down in price, sign me up and I will be there. But I also feel that driving my old car, it still works. It's not doing any more damage. Do you know what I mean? So
I know exactly.
Weighing up a bit.
And it's really interesting because that's that whole thing about the degree of care that we take over the things that we own, and making sure that actually it's one thing the organizations that we're buying our products and products, well, yeah, majority products in this instance from, that they have a responsibility to be sustainable and implement sustainable practices, but actually we as consumers have an obligation to be very careful and thoughtful and care, look after the things that we buy, because that's the way that, beyond just the purchasing itself, the looking after of the products that we engage with is key. Is that part of your experience too?
Oh, massively. I think they've got the right to repair bill coming out in America, specifically California, I think. And Apple say that they support that. Of course they do. It would be corporate suicide to say that they don't support that because I think things like planned obsolescence and not being able to repair products has been such a big part of tech and other industries for so long that it's going out and buying a new pair of shoes instead of being able to repair the ones you have because A, it's cheaper, B, it's easier, C, we don't have the skills ourselves anymore. I've got a sewing machine. I sew some of my old clothes back together, but not well. So I do, if I've got a wedding coming up, I do go and buy a new pair of trousers rather than repairing my old ones because I don't know how to do it. So I think this right to repair, and I think more education for consumers to be able to go away and say, I want to make this last longer. I don't want to contribute to landfill. And also I want to get something good out of it. But just making those options available is so important from the businesses that it's getting there bit by bit. But yeah, it's all information that leads back to giving that information to the consumers.
That's what I was. Yeah, that was going to be my. It's fascinating. That seems to be like a common theme throughout. Is that education of customers, not only in terms of the criteria at play when they're choosing which product or which organization to buy from, but actually, as you say, in terms of educating and upskilling them in being able to look after the things that they own, in order to aid things from that perspective. Richard, I want to just finish our conversation, or not finish, but just want to get you to start thinking about. You're somebody who is like obviously very experienced about building and setting up and developing this company that had recyclability at obviously the very core of what you were doing. If you were thinking about like other other businesses out there where we might have marketing directors or CEOs, etc., listening into this conversation, what would be your advice to them if they were thinking, right, how can we go about further like moving forward our agenda when it comes to recyclability and reuse of materials, etc.? Like, what are the key things that any product-based organizations should start thinking about in your mind?
Oof. I think in environmental issues, I think it's responsibility. It's the right thing to do. I think if that isn't at your forefront moving forward, then just reevaluate slightly if you can and see if there is a better way of doing it. Alternatively, companies spend so much time knowing who their audience is, knowing their demographic, knowing their customer inside and out. Speak to them. Speak to those customers, whether it's in a small team or whether it's publicly on social media or through ad campaigns or something. But speak to those people, get their feedback, see what matters to them, and see what ideas they have. Sometimes it can be a great way of just inspiring people and showing that you're a human brand. Sometimes it can be a great way of getting information that you think, God, I can actually implement this. And firsthand, you've already done your market research that it's going to work. But I think, as has been the common theme through this episode, is information. I think if you can create a product with as much information out there for the consumers to show that you can help them repair it, that you can supply the parts, that you can point them in the right direction, maybe even do a YouTube video or something like that about how to keep this product going and how to get the best out of it. What you're doing is you're showing your consumers that they have value to you as a business. And I think that's the most important thing. I think people want to be valued. And I think that's why people care about the environment, because they should, because it's the right thing to do, because it's cared for us. It's all a bit sing and dance, but information is key. And I think as many times as you can share that information, educate people along with you on your journey or on your product, then the better.
I love that, Richard. I have to say, the bit that really sort of highlighted in what you just said there for me was like bringing people along for the ride, in the sense that almost we're at the moment ourselves building a piece of software for our signatories, the Anti-Greenwash Charter, and one of the things that's obviously key when you're building a solution, if you like, is to try and get people involved so that they can help come up with the new ideas for features and ways of the system working, etc., that perhaps you in your little echo chamber wouldn't necessarily come up with. But it's almost like you can apply that in what I'm hearing from you. You can apply that to recyclability and perhaps sustainability more broadly, where you get people to share with you like their key concerns, like coming back to the beginning of the conversation, like where does the what are the absolute sort of priorities of the different sustainability related issues that affect your decision to engage with our product offering? We understand we're trying to do everything, but we'd love to know what are your priorities so that we can start factoring that into our own strategy. I think that's a brilliant takeaway for people to think, no, we don't just have to do sustainability in our isolated internal mechanism. We can actually engage with our stakeholders in helping to shape our sustainability strategies.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
I love that. Well, who knew? I knew this would be the case, but we've managed to rattle through our 45 minutes of talking through. I feel like we've only touched the surface when it comes to all things sustainability and recyclability together. But Richard, would love for you to finish by just giving us, as I mentioned before we started the recording, just that number one piece of advice you would have offered your younger self from a career perspective to support you moving forward.
Absolutely. I think back and I look over the journey I had. As I said, I didn't have a business degree. I don't have a candle making degree. I've always been able to steer and direct along this journey through the help of other people. So I think any advice that I could go back and give myself that would be the most helpful would be listen to people, lean on people, hear from people. Don't rely on people. It's not always the best advice, but it's nice that they're giving it sometimes. And if anything, it can spark conversations. It can spark your own interest. So follow your heart, but open it up to other people as well a bit.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Isn't it a bit?
Yeah. Speaking and out of interest, actually, Richard, let's just diving into that in a bit more depth. People talk about mentors and coaches and all that kind of stuff. Did that play a role in your development of the recycled candle company, or did you what did your kind of support network look like as you grew the business?
I think definitely looking back, I can definitely see a lot of mentor type figures throughout my journey at various different stages. I think at the time I did feel a bit isolated. I did feel a bit alone. My biggest mentor and help has been my partner of the last 10 years. We started this journey together. We built it together. We talk about it all day. We sit down and discuss it at dinner. Or if we go out for dinner, you can be sure as hell I'm talking about the candles on the tables at the pub. So he's been there through the whole thing. We built this business together. And as I said, we're so grateful to have sold it last year and sort of completed that journey, ready for our new adventures. So he's definitely been mentor number one throughout. But all through the process, when we started doing markets, the lady next to us who'd done a few more years of markets than we had gave us advice, told us what light fitting to buy, told us what time to get there in the morning to get the best spot, all the way through to when we were signing huge UK global contracts with recycling companies that we were able to reach out to other people in the industry and say, hey, what should we look out for? So at every step of the way, there's been someone, and that's why I think I would go back and say, just let yourself open up a little bit to it, to take advice, take support. But yeah, there's been people there along the whole journey that you may not see until the end, but they were there.
It's really interesting that point, though. I think about, I always think to listen to kind of input from other people, but then to have that kind of conviction and confidence in taking those sources and then being clear on your direction. There's almost certainly for me, looking back on early stage of my career, it's almost like if I had listened to more voices, there would have been the potential of getting a bit stuck in the mud, in the sense that being clear about, okay, this is what everybody else is telling me I should be doing, but do I have that inner confidence and conviction in this now being the direction? So I suppose you're right. It's the balancing act. I've got to ask you one final question though on what was it like? I mean, I know it's your one only experience, but people talk about not mixing, family with work, etc. You guys, you and your partner obviously went all in, and it was a partnership, but equally a business working together. So just talk us through that. What's your experience been like of building a company with a partner?
It's a really tricky one. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I grew up in a family hotel. Mum and dad did all the cooking. Mum and dad did all the cleaning. We walked the dog and we had people there, and we lived in a business up until the age of about 18. And then I went to university to do drama. And while I was doing drama, you go out in the evening and you're chatting with directors and you're networking. It's all part of that same thing. And then then the candles happened, and it felt very natural that it was with my partner and that we never switch off. So personally, I've never switched off, and I'm very privileged that I think growing up and having my parents as this example of how it can work and the best parts of it working was really important. And my partner Sargon, he had the same thing. Both his parents were in business. It happened at home. He's been in that environment for as long as he can remember. So for both of us, it worked, but we had some really good role models, luckily. That being said, since selling the company, has our life become a little bit better in our own time and our downtime? Yes, absolutely.
I think that was probably my final query was like, did you find that kind of having the ways of communicating with each other and sort of boundarying your time and being quite intentional in terms of, you mentioned like never switching off, but did you have to find ways of just essentially, you know, I could just imagine it now, you know, with my partner, you know, if we were running a business together and we were, you know, sort of reading before bed kind of thing, and I just turned and said, oh, you know, I've just had a thought about, you know, problem X or problem Y, she certainly wouldn't be particularly receptive at that point to me introducing it. So how did you guys just it was just an agreement that no, we're all in the whole time, you can talk about anything whenever you want, or did you have boundaries in place?
I think the way that we work, we love each other to bits, and you know, we've both been very receptive to each other's ideas over the years. So the moment that one of us starts talking about something, getting passionate about it, the other person enjoys that. And you know, if he's talking to me about something, so he used to do all the design, he used to do all the brochures and the catalogs and the web design, and he'd sit down and he'd talk to me for about half an hour about these two different colors of green, and I couldn't see the difference between these two colors of green. And he'd be like, "What do you think? This one's warmer. This one's this one's that." And I'm just going, yeah, okay. At the same time, since selling the company and not being in work, you know, we'll sit out in the garden and I'll talk to him for about half an hour, 45 minutes about the best possible layout and where to put the onions and where to put the runner beans. He couldn't give a damn. But he just sits there and he sort of nods along and supports me. But I think we're very blessed that over the last 10 years, we've just been so incredibly passionate and excited about moving the business forward because of its various different accolades. But yeah, I know that we're lucky to have what we have.
You certainly sound it. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Richard, thank you so much for giving us some of your time this morning and talking that through. That was a really, really interesting conversation. Hopefully we might snaffle you for another episode later on down the line if you've not been totally put off by joining us today.
No, absolutely. I love it. Yeah. No, thank you for having me. It's been great fun to talk about environmental issues with somebody else, that it doesn't just switch off halfway through.
Excellent. On that note, we'll stop the recording for now, but thank you again.